read one book a day, and tonight we're diving into Goodnight, Mr. Tom. We've all had moments in life where we feel like an isolated island, longing to be seen and embraced, yet fearing that the hand we extend will be pushed away, and that the vulnerability we reveal will be dismissed. The novel we're exploring tonight holds a timeless, gentle redemption. Written by British author Michelle Magorian in 1981, set against the backdrop of the British child evacuation scheme at the start of World War II, it depicts the mutual healing of lonely souls with exquisitely nuanced prose. Not only has it won numerous prestigious awards, such as the Carnegie Medal in Literature, but it has also offered profound comfort to countless adult readers in the quiet of the night. The protagonist of the story is 9-year-old William Beach from the Deptford slums of London. Before being evacuated, his world knew no sunshine, only endless abuse and emotional manipulation from his mother, a devout follower of an extremely strict religion. She blamed all her misfortunes on William, repeatedly indoctrinating him with, "You are sinful and unworthy of love." Under years of emotional torment, William's inner world was filled with inferiority and fear. His inner monologue echoed with despair. "I must obey. If I don't do anything wrong, she won't hit me. I'm a bad child, not deserving of kindness." To survive, he learned to wrap himself in silence and obedience, never daring to speak up when hungry, never mentioning his tattered clothes, hiding his wounds secretly. Even the innocent childhood urge to write or draw was harshly forbidden by his mother as evil pastime. Over time, he became extremely timid, unable to make eye contact, speaking in a barely audible whisper. To others, he was just a slow, clumsy, unsociable, stupid child. In September 1939, the shadow of World War II loomed over Britain. William was herded onto a crowded, sweltering train, heading to the countryside with dozens of other unfamiliar children. As the train jolted forward, the scenery outside the window transformed from the greyness of the city to the emerald green of the countryside. But William felt no anticipation, only overwhelming dread. When the train arrived in the small English village of Little Weirwood, the platform was packed with warm-hearted villagers. One by one, the children were picked up with smiles, leaving William alone like a forgotten blade of grass, huddled timidly in the corner, his hands clutching a tattered suitcase tightly. Inside were only a few rags of clothing. His eyes were filled with fear and unease, his heart trembling uncontrollably. Will they think I'm a bad child too? Will they hate me like Mother does? Just then, a slightly hunched figure stood out in the crowd. It was Tom Oakley. Tom was an elderly hermit in the village, with grey hair casually tied back and deep wrinkles etched into his face. He always wore a faded rough cloth coat and was never without his tan dog, Sam. He was taciturn and avoided small talk, spending his days tending to his cottage covered in ivy next to the church, gardening and walking Sam. The villagers silently labelled him a grumpy old man. No one knew that behind this reclusiveness lay decades of unresolved grief. Years earlier, his wife had died in childbirth, and their newborn baby had not survived either. This double tragedy had closed his heart off completely, condemning him to a life of loneliness. When the evacuation officer brought William to him, Tom's first reaction was to refuse. He was accustomed to the tranquility of his solitary life and had no desire to disrupt it. But as he looked into William's eyes, wide with terror, darting about like a frightened deer, and saw his trembling body, something soft deep within him was stirred. After a long silence, he nodded hesitantly, his voice hoarse. "Come along then." At that moment, his inner conflict was palpable. This child is so pitiful. Can I really take care of him? Or am I just unable to bear the sight of such helplessness? In the early days at Tom's cottage, William remained on constant alert, like a frightened little beast. He watched Tom's every expression and movement instinctively, eating slowly and quietly for fear of making a sound. After meals, he would immediately offer to clear the table, his movements clumsy yet earnest. At night, he dared not even sleep in the bed Tom had prepared for him, instead curling up secretly in the corner. In his mind, warm, soft beds were reserved for good children, and he was not worthy. Once, Tom pulled him to the dining table and handed him a bowl of warm soup. William suddenly began to tremble violently, whispering, "I shouldn't be sitting here. I am sinful." Those words pierced Tom's heart like a thin needle. He fell silent for a long time, not scolding or preaching. Instead, he pushed a piece of freshly baked warm bread in front of William, his voice deep and gentle. "Eat first. We'll talk when you're full." Tom knew no elaborate words of comfort. His kindness resided in these simple, sincere gestures. Staring at the bread, William was filled with confusion. Why isn't he scolding me? Isn't he afraid that a sinful child like me will defile his table? This unfamiliar kindness filled him with both dread and a faint glimmer of hope. William had no idea that his arrival in the cottage was quietly transforming Tom's life too. Tom began to pay close attention to the sensitive boy, giving him clean clothes, making his bed soft and warm, and preparing abundant, varied meals every day. No longer the cold, hard bread William was used to, but steaming soup and soft roasted potatoes. Once, Tom noticed William secretly staring at patterns on paper, his eyes filled with longing. So he quietly went to the village shop, bought paper and pencils, and left them by William's bed. He said no words of encouragement. He simply sat by the door, smoking silently as William drew in secret, watching the smoke drift slowly in the air. When William found the paper and pencils, he froze. He picked up the pencil cautiously, his fingers trembling, and drew a picture of Sam. The lines were childish, yet they perfectly captured Sam's demeanor. After finishing, he immediately hid the drawing behind his bag, his heart pounding. Will Mr. Tom be angry if he finds this? Will he say I'm being idle? Tom had long noticed his movements. He walked over slowly and asked softly, "May I see it?" After a long hesitation, William held out the drawing. His head hung low, unable to meet Tom's gaze. Tom studied it carefully for a long time, then gently patted William's head with his rough palm. "It's lovely. Sam will like it." This was the first time in William's life that anyone had praised him. He looked up suddenly, his eyes lighting up like stars breaking through dark clouds. At that moment, the ice around his heart finally cracked. After that, Tom often took William fishing by the river. Early morning sunlight danced on the water surface, casting shimmering ripples. Tom taught him how to bait a hook, how to cast a line, and waited patiently for the fish to bite. He also showed William the village's flowers and plants, pointing out the shape of ginseng leaves, telling him when the wild roses would bloom, and took him to church services, letting him feel the peace and warmth of the village. With Tom's company, William gradually felt a sense of security he had never known before. He began to dare to make eye contact with others, to run and play with the other village children on the grass. Once, he saw the other children playing with toy trains, and his eyes were filled with envy. After days of hesitation, he asked quietly one evening, "Mr. Tom, can I have a toy train?" As soon as he finished speaking, he hung his head, twisting the hem of his clothes nervously, fearing a negative answer. Tom did not respond immediately. He just patted William's head, his eyes full of tenderness. A few days later, when William came home from school, he pushed open the door to find a brand new blue toy train on the table, its body shiny, able to make a choo-choo sound. Tom had walked several miles to the village toy shop specifically to buy it. William hugged the train tightly, tears pouring out instantly. This was the first toy that truly belonged to him, the first time anyone had cared about his desires. He choked out, "Thank you, Mr. Tom." At that moment, his heart was filled with unprecedented happiness and peace. So, I'm worthy of being loved too. Meanwhile, Tom was also emerging from his grief through his time with William. Once, he had never participated in village events, responding to neighbors' greetings with nothing more than a perfunctory nod. Now, he would take the initiative to say hello, bring William to visit neighbors, and even join everyone at the Harvest Festival. On the day of the Harvest Festival, the village was decorated with lanterns and streamers. Adults danced and chatted in the courtyards, while children chased each other on the grass. Tom sat in the corner, watching William run and laugh with his friends. The sunlight chased away the gloom that had clung to him for so long, and a rare smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Sam adored William too, following him everywhere, nuzzling his palms and licking his cheeks. The once quiet cottage had come alive with warmth and activity. There was always hot food on the table, soft chatter in the rooms, and the sound of running footsteps and laughter in the yard. William was no longer timid and inferior. He had become confident and cheerful, his artistic talent flourishing, earning praise from his teachers and classmates. Tom was no longer the grumpy old man. He had rediscovered the warmth of life and the joy of being needed. A bond stronger than blood had formed between them. They were no longer passers-by in each other's lives, but irreplaceable family. Tom's inner thoughts might have been, "So life isn't just loneliness and memories. There's also such warm companionship." And William was certain, "This is my home." Just as William began to believe he could live happily forever, a letter from London arrived, shattering the peace. It was from his mother, saying that the war situation had eased and ordering him to return immediately, emphasizing that this was his religious duty. Seeing her familiar handwriting, William's face turned ashen, his hands shaking violently. The confidence and security he had only just built collapsed completely. He knew exactly what returning to London would mean, returning to abuse, to the endless darkness of that hell. Overwhelmed by fear, he threw himself at Tom, clinging to his hands so tightly that his nails dug into Tom's flesh, sobbing and begging, "Mr. Tom, I don't want to go back. I want to stay with you. Please don't let me go back." Tom looked into William's terrified eyes, feeling his trembling, and his heart ached as if cut by a knife. He immediately wrote back to William's mother, asking to keep the boy, but the letter was met with silence. A few days later, officials from London arrived at Tom's door, insisting that William must be returned. This was a government regulation, non-negotiable. Tom looked at the officials' serious faces, then at William, who was crying uncontrollably and felt utterly powerless. He could not defy the regulations. He could only watch helplessly as William was taken away. On the day William left, it drizzled lightly. Tom stood at the door, watching William's small figure fade into the distance until it disappeared at the end of the road, remaining motionless for a long time. Sam sensed the separation too, whimpering softly beside him, his voice full of sorrow as if bidding William farewell. Tom's heart felt empty, as if a piece had been torn out. He whispered softly, "Child, I will find you." Back in London, William fell into a nightmare once again. His mother's abuse was even more brutal than before. She resented that he had been spoiled by the country people and had no tolerance left for him. She locked William in a dark, damp attic. Inside was only a tattered mattress, no windows, just a small ventilation hole. The light was dim, and the air was thick with the smell of mold. She gave him barely enough food and water, only a small piece of cold, hard bread each day, and subjected him to constant emotional torture, repeating, "You are sinful, you deserve to suffer." William retreated into his old self, timid and silent, huddled in the corner of the attic, his body growing weaker by the day. Yet his thoughts were never far from Tom. The village sunshine, the fresh air, the hot soup Tom made, the days running with Sam on the grass. He even began to doubt if the warmth of the countryside had been an illusion. Once, he found a broken pencil and a crumpled piece of paper in a crack in the attic wall. Summoning all his strength, he secretly drew a picture of Tom, remembering his face, his rough palms, his gentle eyes. After finishing, he held the drawing tightly to his chest, as if clutching a lifeline, whispering to himself, "Mr. Tom, will you come find me? I miss you so much." That longing became his only support in the darkness. Meanwhile, after William left, Tom's life returned to its former emptiness. The cottage was silent without William's laughter, without the rustle of his drawing. Even Sam seemed listless, but Tom's heart could no longer be at peace. His longing for William grew stronger by the day, wrapping around his heart like ivy. Looking at William's sketches and the blue toy train he had left behind, Tom's anxiety intensified. That woman won't treat him well. William must be suffering. So Tom made a bold decision to go to London to find William. At that time, London was in the midst of intense German bombing raids. German warplanes could appear in the sky at any moment, and the sound of explosions was constant. For an elderly man like Tom, this was undoubtedly a life-or-death adventure. But Tom did not hesitate. He packed a simple bag, carefully placed William's sketches inside, and set off for London with Sam resolutely. There was only one thought in his mind. I must find William. I won't let him suffer anymore. I will take him home. After a long and bumpy journey, Tom finally arrived in London. The sight before him made his heart sink. The once prosperous streets were in ruins, lined with the debris of bombed buildings. Broken bricks, tiles, and furniture littered the gaps between the rubble. The air was thick with smoke and dust, making it hard to breathe. The people on the streets wore expressions of fear and anxiety, hurrying along, fearing that a bomb would fall at any moment. Following the address in William's mother's letter, Tom searched desperately through the ruins. He walked for days, his feet blistered and painful, but he refused to stop. He asked everyone he met for directions. Some shook their heads and walked away. Others pointed hastily, their voices full of exhaustion. Finally, at dusk, he found William's mother's residence. A dilapidated building, its walls covered in cracks, its broken windows boarded up roughly. It looked dark and oppressive, blending into the surrounding ruins. Tom stepped forward quickly and banged on the door hard, but there was no response. He listened carefully and faintly heard faint, intermittent sobbing coming from the attic. A sound both familiar and unfamiliar, making his heart clench tightly. He immediately realized William was locked upstairs. Without hesitation, Tom stepped back, then threw his weight against the slightly ajar door, smashing it open. He rushed up the narrow, steep stairs. When he pushed open the tattered attic door, the sight before him made his heart ache beyond words. William was huddled on the mattress in the corner, wearing ragged clothes covered in old and new wounds. His face was as pale as paper, his lips cracked, his eyes empty and lifeless. Only his faint breathing proved he was still alive. "William, I'm here. I've come to take you home." Tom's voice trembled uncontrollably as he hurried to William's side, lifting him gently yet firmly into his arms. That embrace was warm and solid, filled with the familiar scent William had missed so much. Hearing Tom's voice, it was like a call from heaven, summoning his last bit of strength. William opened his eyes slowly. Through blurred vision, he saw Tom's face, and a weak smile crossed his lips before he fainted. Panic surged through Tom. He immediately picked William up and ran frantically through the smoke-filled streets, searching for a hospital, calling William's name repeatedly. "William, hold on. We're almost at the hospital. Don't sleep. Look at me." Finally, he found a makeshift hospital and rushed William inside. At the hospital, Tom stayed by William's bedside day and night, caring for him meticulously, wiping the dust from his face, holding his cold hand gently. The doctor told Tom that William was severely weakened by long-term malnutrition, abuse, and the harsh conditions in the attic, and was running a high fever. His condition was critical, and he needed prolonged rest. Tom nodded, his eyes determined. "I will stay with him until he gets better." He made a silent vow, this time, no matter what it cost, he would never let William leave him again. With Tom's careful care, William's health gradually improved, and the light returned to his eyes. Tom knew William could never go back to that environment, so he reported the abuse to the local authorities. After an investigation, the officials found that William's mother had suffered a complete mental breakdown due to the long-term stress of the war, the hardships of life, and the grief of losing her husband, making her unfit to fulfill her guardianship duties. Soon after, London was hit by another massive bombing raid. The building where William's mother lived was struck by a bomb, and she was killed instantly. When Tom heard the news, he felt no joy, only a quiet sigh. He grieved for the suffering William had endured, not for the woman who had hurt him. After that, Tom immediately applied to the court to adopt William, telling the judge repeatedly that he would take good care of the boy and give him a warm home. After a series of tedious procedures, the court finally approved his application, and Tom officially became William's guardian. When he told William the news, the boy froze for a moment, then threw himself into Tom's arms, hugging him tightly and crying loudly. This time, his tears were not of sorrow or fear, but of pent-up grief and the joy of finally finding a home. He choked out, "Mr. Tom, I finally have a real home." Tom patted his back gently, his voice soft. "Yes, my boy, we're going home." Tom brought William back to the cottage in Little Weirwold, to the place filled with warm memories. The familiar surroundings and scents helped William recover quickly, both physically and mentally. Tom continued to care for him with his clumsy yet unwavering tenderness, teaching him more knowledge, showing him the wonders of the countryside, accompanying him to draw and fish. William grew even more cheerful and confident, his artistic talent thriving. He won a prize in his school's art competition. His entry was a painting of Tom, Sam, and the cottage, warm and full of love, praised by everyone who saw it. The villagers were delighted for them, growing to love the once timid boy who had blossomed into a sunny child, and admiring Tom's kindness and warmth even more. Sam was overjoyed to have William back, following them everywhere they went, both indoors and out. The cottage was filled with laughter and chatter once again. Hot food always on the table, the sound of playful running in the yard. Every corner of the house exuded the warmth of home. William's heart was finally at peace and full of happiness. He knew he would never be abandoned or hurt again. One quiet night in the countryside, the only sounds were the chirping of insects and the rustle of the wind. William lay in bed, and Tom sat beside him, telling him stories of the village, fireflies that glowed at night, rivers that froze in winter, golden wheat fields during harvest. As William listened, his eyes softened. He said quietly, "Thank you, Mr. Tom. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." Tom put down the storybook and patted William's head gently with his rough palm, his voice warm and steady. "Go to sleep, my boy. I'm here." William closed his eyes, a happy smile on his face, and soon drifted off into a peaceful sleep. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating his young face and Tom's. Tom watched William sleep, his heart filled with warmth and contentment. He knew he had finally emerged from the shadow of loneliness, finding a new purpose in life. And William, too, had escaped the trauma of his past, finding a true home to call his own. Two once lonely souls, brought together by chance, had found the warmest redemption in each other. Set against the backdrop of World War II, Goodnight, Mr. Tom tells a simple yet deeply moving story of redemption. It vividly shows us that war not only destroys cities and homes, but also inflicts devastating damage on the fates of ordinary people, especially the fragile hearts of children. William's experience is representative of countless evacuated children during World War II. forced to separate from their families, struggling to survive in unfamiliar environments, enduring fear and loneliness, some even losing the chance to return home forever. Yet the novel does not dwell solely on the cruelty of war. Instead, it portrays the brilliance of human nature and the healing power of love with delicate prose. Tom and William, two lonely souls, form a bond of mutual redemption through their chance encounter. With his silent yet unwavering tenderness, Tom heals William's wounds, transforming him from a timid, inferior child into a confident, cheerful young boy. In return, William's arrival is like a ray of sunshine, illuminating Tom's closed heart, helping him emerge from the grief of losing his family and rediscover the beauty and warmth of life. The love depicted in the story is never expressed through grand words or dramatic gestures. Instead, it resides in the little moments of daily life. A bowl of hot soup on a cold night, a set of clean clothes, a sincere word of praise, a warm embrace in times of fear, a resolute journey across the dangers of war to find someone. This simple, pure love possesses immense power. It can pierce through darkness and suffering, light up the corners of the heart, help wounded souls stand again, and let lonely people find a sense of belonging. This is why the novel has been able to comfort readers across generations. It reminds us that no matter how difficult our circumstances may be, love is always our strongest weapon against suffering. Bringing this into the present day, while we no longer face the threat of war, we are still plagued by various difficulties and traumas. Perhaps the high pressure of work leaves you exhausted, feeling that life has lost its meaning. Perhaps setbacks in relationships make you afraid to trust others easily, gradually closing yourself off. Perhaps wounds from your family of origin have left you lacking a sense of security in your growth, unable to accept or love yourself. We often feel lonely, thinking that no one truly understands us, struggling alone, just like Tom and William once did. But this book tells us that no matter what difficulties we face, we should never give up our longing for warmth and love. Sometimes, a sincere companionship, a warm word of encouragement, can become the strength to move forward. A person who accepts us for who we are, a place where we feel safe. These can help us rediscover the courage to live. Just as Tom accepted William's vulnerability and William accepted Tom's loneliness, they grew into better versions of themselves through each other's companionship. At the same time, the novel also prompts us to deeply reflect on the meaning of self-identity. For a long time, due to his mother's constant emotional abuse, William firmly believed that he was sinful and unworthy of love, taking others' negative judgments as the ultimate definition of himself. But through Tom's love and praise, he gradually recognized his own worth, realizing that he was not a bad child and that he deserved kindness. This is extremely insightful for modern people. In a society filled with competition and comparison, we are easily influenced by external voices, falling into self-doubt and feeling that we are not good enough. But we must remember that every person is unique, with their own value and light. We do not need to prove ourselves through others' approval, nor should we deny ourselves because of others' criticism. Learning to accept our imperfections, face our traumas head-on, and love ourselves well, this is the foundation for finding happiness and peace. Just as William was able to embrace the happiness of the future only after accepting his past. Furthermore, the novel also demonstrates the profound connection between individuals and their times. Tom and William's fates were shaped by World War II. They had no choice but to struggle to survive in the hardships imposed by the era. Yet they were not overwhelmed by the tide of history, nor did they lose themselves in suffering. Instead, they held fast to their kindness and hope in their own way, supporting each other through the difficult years. This shows us that even in the darkest of times, the light of human nature never goes out. Even in despair, we still have the right to choose kindness and love. In today's world, we also face various challenges and difficulties. Perhaps the pressure of life, perhaps the changes of the times. But as long as we have love, hope, and perseverance in our hearts and cherish the warmth around us, we can overcome difficulties and live a fulfilling life. This book reminds us that no matter how times change, kindness and love will always be our most precious treasures. Good night. Mr. Tom is like a warm light in the dark night, healing the wounds and loneliness in our hearts with its gentle prose. It teaches us that no matter how much suffering we endure, love is always the best medicine for healing. No matter what difficulties we face, we should never give up our pursuit of happiness. There will always be someone who comes to us with tenderness, accompanying us through the darkness. On this quiet night, may this story dispel your fatigue and unease, allowing you to feel warmth and peace as you sleep. No summary can replace the original work. A good book is worth reading page by page. Good night, and wish you a sound sleep tonight. I'm Time for Bed. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to our next encounter.